opportunity on the front row. So if you'd like a really good seat, please come on up. My name is Brian Fuller. I'm the lead pastor here at East Brandywine Baptist Church, and we're so thankful that you joined us this evening for a dialogue between Miss Margaret Downey of the Free Thought Society and Mr. Abdu Murray from Embrace the Truth. And we've been looking forward to this event for quite some time, and we're finally here. So I'm going to open up our service, our time together in prayer, and then I'm going to invite both of our guests up here, and I will introduce each of them, and then they will follow that with a 15-minute opening statement, their story. And then we're going to give opportunity, and you'll notice there are microphones on both sides for you to come up and ask questions. Each of our guests will have opportunity at 2 minutes, and I'm going to try to keep them to that, to answer your questions, and then they can have a little rebuttal if they would like to the other one's answer. This is not a debate, it's a dialogue, but there are some overlaps between a debate and a dialogue that we'll enjoy together this evening. We do ask that when you come to ask a question that you would give us your first name, and as you give us the first name, then ask your question. Only one question per person, and please don't make those too long, okay? We will have someone watching those mics, and they may tell you to hurry on, okay? So please keep those brief where we can get to as many questions as possible tonight. But I am going to open us in prayer, and then I'll have our guests come forward, and we'll introduce them. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for opportunities like this where we can have dialogue, we can have opportunity to discuss what you have revealed and how that hits human hearts. And I pray tonight that clarity would be given as we discuss these things. Thank you for Margaret's willingness to come and Abdu's willingness to come, and for us to be able to observe this and listen and learn. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So let's give a round of applause to our two guests. We'll have them come up here, and I will introduce them. First of all, to my left, to your right, is Miss Margaret Downey, and I want to thank you for coming, Margaret. You have been here before, and you've come back, and we thank you. I mentioned before, we have home court advantage for sure, having you here, and we thank you for your gracefulness in coming. I do want to let you know about Margaret, if you don't know about her. She is the founder of the Free Thought Society, the Anti-Discrimination Support Network, as well as the Thomas Paine Memorial Committee. She's published in 3 books that we know about: Parenting Beyond Belief, A Better Life, and 50 Voices of Disbelief. You've been represented the interest of non-theist, atheist community since 1995, and at 93, I'm sorry, at several United Nations conferences. And also, one of the things that stuck out to me on your website, and I mentioned this to you earlier, that I really applaud, that you've devoted your life to ending any and all discrimination against any and all people of the world. And that's a very noble mission. And I know we both grew up in the South, and you experienced a lot of discrimination as a young child, and it's become a mission of your life. We're delighted to have you here tonight. Let's give Miss Downey another round of applause. And to my right, your left, is Abdu Murray. He's from Detroit, Michigan. He's the president of Embrace the Truth. He has a BA of psychology from the University of Michigan. Go Wolverines. And he has a Juris Doctor from the University of Michigan Law School. He has written a few books, and we have those available at the back: Saving Truth, Grand Central Question, White Man's Religion, Why the Gospel Has Never Been Merely White, male-centered, or just another religion. And one of Abdu's missions that you'll see on his website, and we've been able to enjoy some of this weekend, some of us, is he offers the credibility of the gospel to every questioner he encounters. It's a great privilege to have you here, Abdu. Let's give him a round of applause as well. So what we like to do is start with just a 15-minute, and I'm not going to be huge on the time, but you don't have to take it all. But if you go beyond it, I will become huge on the time. But if you could start us, Abdu, and give us some of your story, some of your passion about the existence of God, and then we'll do the same for Margaret.
Well, thank you.
No, we won't count the time yet.
Are we on? Let's see. Did I do something wrong? Oh, yeah. I've only been doing this for 20 years. Well, thank you all for having me, and for 15 minutes. I'm Lebanese. We can't say hello in 15 minutes, but I will definitely try to do a little bit better than that. Thank you all for having me. Pastor Brian, thanks for setting this up and having this wonderful event. Gordon and Nancy, thank you for being so integral in making this happen. And of course, my special thanks goes to you, Margaret, for your graciousness and your generosity of time in being a part of what I hope is an extremely meaningful event. So thank you very much for that graciousness. My name is Abdu Murray, and as some of you already know, I have a Muslim background. I came from Islam. I wasn't raised a Christian. I didn't want Christianity to be true. I thought it was well-meaning, but wrong-headed in many, many ways. And I was raised in the States, and so in the area I grew up in southwest Detroit, there was a lot of diversity in some areas, but in some areas not so much. And one of the areas I grew up in had a lot of people who would claim the moniker Christian. And back then in the 80s, you know, I was born in the 70s, I'm a child of the 80s, I remember the 80s. In the 80s and the 90s, it was sort of fashionable to say you were a Christian, even if you didn't really mean it. So I, as a Muslim, had a different view of religion. So religion was actually an identity issue. It wasn't just a matter of, oh, I was raised a Muslim and it means something to me, kinda. Because in the East, religion is a big part of your identity, even if you don't necessarily follow it. And there's plenty of Muslims who don't actually follow their religion very assiduously. They just happen to have that moniker on them because religious identity is a big part of who you are as an Easterner or a Middle Easterner. And not as much in the West. You can be committed to your religious beliefs, but you often have a moniker of Christian. It doesn't really mean a whole lot. You go to church on Christmas and Easter and these kind of things. Well, I would ask my friends, and Christians were sort of low-hanging fruit. I was sort of an equal opportunity faith knocker outer over. If you were someone who wasn't a Muslim, you got to hear from me after a while you were wrong and I was right. Not in an obnoxious way, at least I hope it wasn't. It was more conversational. And I would begin my conversations with Christians especially because they were sort of low-hanging fruit, you know. I would ask them this question, why are you a Christian? And they'd say stuff like, I don't know, I go to the Presbyterian church on Christmas and Easter, so I'm a Presbyterian? And I'd say, that sounded like a question, not an answer. Are you even sure you know? And so they said, well, you don't really think these things through. It's matters of faith. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, in my tradition, you do think things through. I have thought it through for you. Here's 15 reasons why you're wrong. Now, I wouldn't do it exactly like that. It'd be more conversational. And what happened over time was I was engaging with Christians, many of whom hadn't thought through their worldview, but plenty had thought through their worldview. And I said before, I had engaged with people of various worldviews, whether it was Eastern, whether it was pantheists, like Hindus and Buddhists, and people who were non-theists, who were also religious, like Buddhists or Confucianists. Confucianists didn't run around a whole lot in Metro Detroit, but there were a few. Talking with atheists as well, and people of different worldviews, because ultimate reality was something important to me. Like, I was a red-blooded American teenager, you know. I talked about movies, girls, sports, and that kind of stuff, but ultimately I wanted to talk about eternal truths, like what happens after all this? What is the meaning behind all of this? I needed to know, is there truth behind any of these claims? And I was fervently committed at that point to Islam. Well, there was two guys who came to the door of my apartment while I was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan. And they were Baptist guys, and they wanted to offer me, you know, the gospel and say, hey, let's talk about Jesus. And most of the people at the apartment complexes in University of Michigan either didn't answer the door or slammed the door in their face and was like, no thanks, don't want to talk to you. But they came to my door, and I was like, you guys deliver. This is pretty sweet. So I remember those guys very fondly. They came into my apartment. I made them very uncomfortable for hours at a time. But they kept coming back. Now, to shorten the story a little bit, I was very interested in showing them a contradiction in the scriptures, in the Bible, that would sort of knock the faith out of them. Not one of these things that's like, you know, a rounding number or a spelling mistake or a grammar thing or a copyist error that made it from the notes into the manuscripts. But I mean like an honest to goodness, like this, Jesus says X in this gospel and then not X in this one, kind of a thing. So I'm reading a Bible, not to believe a word of it, but to find the holes in it. And I come across Luke chapter 3, verses 7 and following. And John the Baptist is talking to those who are coming to be baptized, and he says, who told you to flee from the wrath to come? Meaning, of course, God's judgment. And he says, therefore bear fruits in keeping with repentance. And then he says something remarkable. He says, do not even begin to think to yourself, you have Abraham as your father, as if being, you know, genetically linked to Abraham was going to save them from anything that has to do with the recompense for their sin. He says, for I tell you, God can raise up children of Abraham from the stones. In other words, your DNA doesn't make you special. Truth is what saves, tradition does not, unless your tradition happens to be true. Well, I was reading this and it suddenly rocked me. I'm like thinking to myself, oh my goodness, hold on a second. I was saying that to Christians. I would ask them, why are you a Christian? They'd say tradition. I'd say, not good enough. And John the Baptist essentially was saying the same thing I was saying. And that irritated me because I didn't want to believe this book or even listen to the guidance that's in this book. And so it convicted me that day that had a Christian ever had an opportunity, and I didn't give him a whole lot of opportunities, to ask me why I was a Muslim, I was more interested in getting them to become Muslims, I think the answer would have been, and I would have rattled off a bunch of reasons why I thought Islam was true and all that, but the real fundamental reason I had to confront within myself was tradition. What a hypocrite. And it was the Bible's words that convicted me of my own hypocrisy. And that began a 9-year journey into the historical, philosophical, theological, existential reasons why I should believe anything. And over the course of that time, to make the story just a long story, maybe a little longer actually, I began to study every ism and schism I could look at. I wanted to believe something because it was true, not because it was mere tradition. And I knew as a Muslim, there would be a price to pay for that. And so one of the things that I think is a commonality that Margaret and I can actually share is that I think we had a conviction to go find the truth wherever it led, even if it hurt. And I think that you and I share that common conviction. So if there's anything other than this chair that we're sitting down in these two chairs that we have in common, I think we have that. And I want to let you know I've heard some of your story, and I really admire the way you stuck to your convictions even when it hurt. But along the way, I began to consider maybe there is no God. Maybe Islam and Christianity, none of them have it right. I was looking into mostly religious systems, but I began to look and see, does any of them have it right? Any of them have it right? And then I began to realize something as I was reading more and more philosophers and thinkers and scientists and others, that the very endeavor I was engaging in, the rational inquiry I was engaging in, only made sense if rationality actually exists. And rationality, I think, only exists if God exists. In other words, better put, God is the best explanation for rational inquiry. Because if we're just a random collocation of atoms, as Bertrand Russell had said, then we don't actually have the ability to make rational inferences based on evidence. We don't have a free will that exercises itself to do that kind of a thing. But here I was engaged in a rational endeavor to find out what the truth was. So the rational endeavor itself only made sense then. Consider the words of Thomas Nagel, for example. Thomas Nagel, an atheist philosopher out of New York University. Evolutionary naturalism implies that we shouldn't take any of our convictions seriously, including the scientific world picture on which evolutionary naturalism itself depends. Then he goes on to say, for a satisfactory explanation of consciousness as such, a general psychophysical theory of consciousness would have to be woven into the evolutionary story, one of which makes intelligible both one, why specific organisms have the conscious life they have, and two, why conscious organisms arise in the history of life on Earth. He's saying an evolutionary paradigm has to explain those two things. And this is what he says. This is an atheist philosopher out of New York University. He says, at this point, such a theory is complete fantasy. And we can go on, and then I realized that the scientific endeavor that I was looking into, does science back up anybody's faith? Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, deism, whatever it might be, where does the science actually point? Then you realize that the scientific endeavor is actually made more sense of from a theistic standpoint, and I would argue even a Christian standpoint. And that's what inspired people. You know, we have this sort of idea that there's been a conflict between science and faith for the centuries, but then you look at people like Galileo, Copernicus, Louis Pasteur, Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, Blaise Pascal, Gregor Mendel, Robert Boyle, Michael Faraday, Johannes Kepler. All these people were either theists or Christians. And they didn't hang up their faith on the hook when they put their lab coats on. Rather, their faith inspired their inquiry into an intelligible world. Contemporary Christian scientists like Erica Carlson, a physicist out of Purdue, Ard Louis out of Oxford, John Polkinghorne, also out of Oxford and Cambridge, John Lennox, double doctorate in mathematics, Francis Collins, one of the eminent geneticists in the world, and Rosalind Picard, who is a leading AI researcher out of MIT, all of whom are ardent Christians, Rosalind Picard, I had the benefit of meeting just a few weeks ago, and she made the comment that as she studies AI and studies the human mind to inform AI, she is made more in awe of the divine mind behind all of it. So the rational inquiry made more sense, or God is the best explanation for the rational inquiry I was engaging in the first place. It made the best sense of the fact that the world is intelligible for science even to exist in the first place. It also had a profound effect, I found, as you look into the Christian history, and the reality is Christianity does have quite a few pockmarks on its history. We can't sugarcoat this. This is not something that we should be whitewashing or glossing over. We have to reconcile with this. We have to deal with this. But the history of Christianity is one that's rich with the implementation of the very idea of the hospital, of the very ideas of charities for those who were indigent. It was the Christians who went onto the plague ships, got plagued themselves in order to help people that no one else would help. Fast forward 500 years, and you find that Christians were going into Ebola-infested West Africa just a few years ago, getting Ebola themselves so they could help those who had Ebola. And they were inspired by and pushed into this by essentially their conviction that their paradigm, the Savior, was one who sacrificed everything for their sake. How could they not sacrifice of their own lives for the sake of others? In fact, this benefit to all of humanity is recognized by some very prominent non-believers and non-theists. Consider the words of Matthew Paris, who wrote an article in the Times Online. As an atheist, the title is, "As an atheist, I truly believe Africa needs God." In 2008, he said this: "Now a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the works of secular NGOs, government projects, and international aid efforts. These alone will not do. Education and training alone will not do." Listen to what he says now. "In Africa, Christianity changes people's hearts. It brings a spiritual transformation. The rebirth is real. The change is good." Not the words of a Christian. The atheist philosopher, sociologist, and Italian senator Marcello Pera, in his article, "Why We Should Call Ourselves Christians," it's actually a book. He says, "If we live as Christians, we will be wiser and more aware of the dangers we face. We will not separate morality from truth. We will not confuse moral autonomy with any free choice. We will not treat individuals, whether the unborn or the dying, as things. We will not allow all desires to be transformed into rights. We will not confine reason within the boundaries of science, nor will we feel alone in a society of strangers or oppressed by the state that appropriates us because we no longer know how to guide ourselves." And then from the personal, so from the from the rational inquiry to the existence of science, to the benefits, I think, to the world, and then to make it personal. For me, this is for me. If there is no God, then we're it, and we become the God of our own skull-sized world. And that makes us the standard. And I don't know if you've noticed in history, 24 hours is one of the worst inventions of the past 60 years. But one thing it has showed us is that when we're the gods of our own universe, it's a little bit rough. It's a little bit rough. And that can be a pretty religious thing, because we begin to exalt ourselves or our institutions, and we create our own dogmas that we feel obligations to fulfill. We feel an obligation to fulfill the dogma of success, the dogma of making sure you leave a legacy, the dogma of making sure that you do the best you can, that a life well lived is the only life worth living, when there are, but there are plenty of people who can't even live that kind of a life. Do they have value just because they couldn't live that life? Or is there something intrinsically valuable to each one of us, even if we can't live our best life now? Is there something intrinsically valuable to us? And I think that's where the Christian faith sort of leads me to, this idea that we have an objective value that's not dependent upon any one human opinion or the mass of human opinion. It doesn't depend on that. It depends on something that is transcendent and personal. As I close, I'm reminded of the words of David Foster Wallace. I'll quote him and then one other person, if you don't mind my doing so. David Foster Wallace, not a Christian, in his 2005 commencement address to Kenyon College, he pointed out this idea that everyone believes something. At some point, everyone worships something, even if they don't believe in anything transcendent. He says this, in the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there is actually no such thing as atheism. Now, he doesn't mean there's no such thing as atheism specifically. He's saying everyone believes in something. There is no such thing as not worshiping. He says everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And an outstanding reason for choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship, be it JC, which is his term, not mine, or Allah, be it Yahweh, or the wicked mother goddess, or the Four Noble Truths, or some infrangible set of ethical principles, is that pretty much anything else you worship that's not transcendent will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. It's the truth. Worship your own body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you will die a million deaths before they finally plant you. Worship power, you will feel weak and afraid, and you will need ever more and more power over others to keep the fear at bay. Worship your intellect, being seen as smart, you will end up feeling stupid, a fraud, always on the verge of being found out. And as age ravages you, you'll begin to see that that worship is misplaced. And he says, and so on. So let me bring this to a close. I think that these, for me, were the things that showed that this search I was on only made sense in the first place if there is a transcendent reality to which we can actually aspire. We can't know all of it. None of us will know all of it, but we can aspire to know this thing. And I began to see something, that it is, I think, the Christian message which actually gives the value to every single life that is made in God's image, an objective, transcendent reality, and then actually puts money where its mouth is, so to speak. You know, Richard Dawkins was famous for saying in River Out of Eden that if there's no God, if this life is exactly what we should expect of meaningless tragedies and meaningless good fortune. Not my words, but that tragedy that someone has felt, that good fortune that someone has felt can either be something that God himself can enter into in the blessing or in the suffering. And so each one of us, I believe, as I come through this whole thing, to see that each one of us has an objective value, independent of my opinion of you. And no one can take that image of God from you, not even you. So no one dares denigrate another person based on that. Comes from the Christian cross, which says that God so loved the world, that's everyone, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever shall believe in him, that's anyone, will not perish but have everlasting life. How do you know how valuable something is? You know how valuable something is? By what you're willing to pay for it. And if the cause of the universe says that he's going to pay an infinite value for you and my sake so we can spend eternity with him, well then I think that is an utter statement in the course of history of each one of our values. To quote Ayaan Hirsi Ali, and you might know who this is, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was a Muslim who left Islam because of the way it treated women and persecution she felt, and then became an atheist. Very famous atheist, her best-selling book, Infidel. A few months ago, she declared that she's a Christian. And she said this, I have recognized in my own long journey through a wilderness of fear and self-doubt that there is a better way to manage the challenges of existence than either Islam or unbelief have to offer. And I think she's applicable for our particular conversation, because here's somebody who went one step further than either Margaret or I went through. She went through 3 worldviews. I only went through 2. So thank you guys for your time. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you, Abdu. Margaret.
Okay. Is that better? Okay. So please note that individuals may have differing opinions on the merits of atheism versus religious beliefs. In regards to religious beliefs, I completely understand how many people need to find meaning, community, and purpose within a religious framework. Ultimately, the superior attitude of atheists versus religious belief is subjective and depends on individual perspectives and values. And as I stated earlier, I'm an activist known for my work that advocates for secularism and the separation of religion and government. In 1992, I filed a discrimination complaint against the Boy Scouts of America because the organization had policies excluding atheists and other non-theists from membership. I am an atheist, and I'm comfortable with that label, but I reared my son to think freely and to find his own way. When I objected to the Boy Scouts of America for throwing out my son, who simply replaced the word God with the word good, I argued that their membership policy was discriminatory and violated my son's rights as a non-religious person. My complaint was part of a broader effort to challenge the Boy Scouts of America's membership policies, which historically required members to adhere to a religious belief in a higher power. The Boy Scout policy had been the subject of controversy and legal challenges for many years before I filed my complaint. People earlier than I sought to end the exclusion of individuals who do not subscribe to traditional religious beliefs or LGBTQ plus people. And the Boy Scouts of America faced numerous legal challenges related to their membership policies, including those concerning discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Now, over time, the organization has made some changes to its policy in response to these challenges, but issues related to religious and philosophical discrimination continue to be debated within the organization. Now, it's worth noting that gays, trans, and girls are now able to join the Boy Scouts of America, but atheists are still ineligible to join, volunteer, or even to work for them. Now, to this day, my son's request to add one more O to the Boy Scout oath and adjusting their declaration of religious principles is apparently too much to ask of the world's largest youth group. My discrimination against the Boy Scouts of America was heard at the Chester County Courthouse on High Street in Westchester, and I felt that a fair trial might not be possible. You see, to enter the courthouse, one must pass by a large plaque attached to the facade of the building that displays a Protestant version of the Ten Commandments. Now, you may wonder why the display of a Ten Commandments plaque on the outside of the Chester County Courthouse is objectionable, but I was not the only one who found the display disturbing. In 2001, Chester County resident Sally Flynn joined me to file a complaint about the display of the Ten Commandments on the Chester County Courthouse due to the concerns we had about the violation of the principle of separation of religion and government. We were so concerned that displaying religious symbols or texts such as the Ten Commandments in a government building, and in this case it was a courthouse, that it could be interpreted as an endorsement of a particular religion. We wondered how we, as non-theists, would be treated by the people who work inside a building that provided a prominent place to declare a list of religious thou shalt nots. And both Sally and I had indeed encountered religiosity empowered employees who tried to pressure us to accept the importance of religion. There were many instances that people were asked to place one hand on a Bible, raise the other, and say or agree to, "So help me God." Now, such a request and the display of the Protestant version of the Ten Commandments is really seen as a violation of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which prohibits the government from establishing or promoting any specific religion. Our claim was aimed at ensuring that government institutions must remain neutral in matters of religion and do not favor one faith over another's or endorse religion over non-religion. The Ten Commandments plaque is still on display at the Chester County Courthouse, but the building is no longer used for trials. Now, speaking about the Chester County Courthouse, for 3 years, the Free Thought Society was able to display a tree of knowledge during the winter holiday in what is known as the Free Speech Zone. The years of our display were 2007, 2008, and 2009. The Tree of Knowledge was not only in response to the yearly display of a nativity scene on public property during the holiday season, but also a way to acknowledge the rapidly growing non-theist community in Chester County. By showcasing the Tree of Knowledge equally with the nativity scene, the Free Thought Society aimed to promote diversity and inclusion by representing secular beliefs alongside religious ones in the public sphere. The Tree of Knowledge served as a visual reminder of the importance of keeping religious and secular institutions separate in accordance with the principles of the First Amendment. Well, the Tree of Knowledge came to an end in 2010 when the Chester County Commissioners passed Resolution 5810. The resolution ended the public use of a free speech zone during the winter holiday months of November and December. Resolution 5810 allowed the commissioners to select the holiday symbols that they, and they alone, found appropriate. Now, needless to say, our Tree of Knowledge was no longer a welcome display. The commissioners said that the secular community would instead be represented by a fat Santa, reindeer, toy soldiers, and a sled full of presents. Now, these childish symbols are a far cry from what we really stand for. We contend that the non-theist symbol that best represents us promotes knowledge and education. The book covers on our tree were chosen to start needed conversations about history, science, philosophy, art, and sociology. And we also highlight our non-theist heroes on the Tree of Knowledge with the use of biographies and autobiographies. Now, you can read more about the Tree of Knowledge and many other subjects in the complementary literature I brought with me tonight. So please help yourself to the 4 editions I have laid out on a table in the entry. If we run out of those, you can find the Free Thought Society website has printable color PDFs of all of our newsletters. Now, there is a reason I talk to you about my activism. I ask for you now to imagine if the world's largest youth group should suddenly find that Baptists are not good enough to participate in any way. Imagine if there is a 10-point atheist creed displayed at your courthouse. Imagine if your holiday symbol was rejected and told that the Baptist community would be represented by childish items. Imagining what it's like to be discriminated against for what you don't believe in. Just imagine that. Seeking equality can lead not to just tolerance, but acceptance and friendship. There are ways in which equality and respect can be achieved, and we are, as of tonight, maybe traveling down that road. So, do I have any more time?
Thank you. We'll go to some questions. Let's give her a big hand. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you both for your opening statements, and I want to give opportunity for some questions to be given. And so here's what we're going to do. If you would like to ask a question, we have a microphone on both sides, on the both side aisles. If you could come up and line up, I'm going to start by posing a question. They'll have 2 minutes to answer, and then if they would like to give about a minute rebuttal of the other's answers, there'll be an opportunity for that. Also, if we could just be reminded, this is not a debate, it's a dialogue. So we're not going to hoot and holler for either team. We're just going to enjoy the back and forth and the dialogue. But please no screaming or yelling or cheering for either of our guests tonight. We would like for them both to be able to present their answers without interruption. I'm going to pose the first question, and since we started with you on the opening, maybe I'll start with you, Margaret, on this one. What would be your best argument for the non-existence of God? And then I'm going to change the question, of course, for you, Abdu, on your best argument for the existence of God. So, Margaret, your best argument for the non-existence of God.
Oh boy. Well, if God exists, then ask yourself, is he all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good? If God is all of that, he would be able to prevent evil and suffering. If God were omnipresent, he would know all about the evil and the suffering in the world. And if God is perfectly good, he would want to prevent evil and suffering. But evil and suffering exist in the world. Therefore, your God is not omnipotent and unable to prevent evil, or not perfectly good, or God simply doesn't exist. And that's where I come from. But I do say that nature does exist. Nature doesn't know good from bad or right from wrong. Nature does not judge. Bad things happen, and they are totally expected in a natural world.
Thank you, Margaret. And if you want to have a rebuttal to that and then give me an answer to the question, and Margaret will have an opportunity to give a rebuttal to your answer. So I don't know if you want to take advantage of that now.
Sure. Well, actually, my response is actually really related.
Perfect.
To Margaret's
there we go.
Response,
So your question is best argument for the existence of God.
Yeah, well, and best, I'll do an oh boy too. How about that? I'll do an oh boy, because sometimes it's like, boy, you know, F.W. Borum once said that the problem with certain beliefs is that not that some things explain it, but that everything explains it, so you don't know where to go. So on this one, let me say this. A couple of things. I think one of the best arguments for God's existence is the existence of argument. The fact that we could actually engage rationally. You see, if we're just biochemical machines, you take a look at like someone like Sam Harris, for example, who wrote a book called Free Will, where he argues there is no such thing as free will. And as a neuroscientist, he basically says you and I are just bags of chemicals that respond to external stimuli based on the way we're wired. And so our beliefs aren't based necessarily on rational thought or rational truth. It's based on how we respond to the stimuli around us. And whether we engage in some kind of an inquiry or in an argumentation, it's not really based on whether or not you draw inferences. You're wired a certain way, and you're going to do a certain thing because you're wired that way. And if we're a random collocation of atoms, that's what's going to happen. But that doesn't happen. We actually engage in free thought. We actually engage in these things, which suggests that there's something, I think, non-material about what it means to be human. Raymond Tallis, the atheist thinker, who is actually a brilliant guy, I highly recommend you read his book, by the way, Aping Mankind, where he argues that neuromania, he calls it neuromania, the idea that you can explain everything through neuroscience, or Darwinitis, the idea you can explain everything through Darwin, it doesn't actually give you an explanation for human consciousness. Now, he doesn't say God is that explanation. He doesn't go that far. But he says all the evidence on offer right now does not get you there. It suggests that there is a non-material aspect to why we can even engage into argument in the first place. And that relates then, therefore, to the problem of evil and the problem of suffering, because it is an argument, and it's a powerful one. It's one we cannot gainsay. We cannot simply brush it aside and say that, I think many of you, people who are believers in God, have wondered, where are you when it hurts? Where are you? Don't you care? I had this question posed to me by a good friend when he asked me, how can a God who is all-powerful and all-loving exist when he let my mother die when I was 10? It's a powerful question. It's no longer just philosophical, friends. The existential rubber has met the philosophical road, and now it's time to matter. And so the thing that I think about with this is, if you're trying to suggest that an omnipotent God who knows everything is logically impossible in a world where suffering and evil exists, the burden is very high to prove that impossibility. Because if we're talking about a God who is omnipotent, then he would know all past things, he would know all future things, he would know all present things, and he would know all counterfactual things. He would know all things that could have happened. You all could have chosen not to come here. After hearing me talk, maybe you think, maybe I should not to come here. But there would be a million different things that would have spiderwebbed from that one decision you would have chosen otherwise. And God knows all that. If the God I believe in exists, he would know all that. So is it therefore logically impossible for a God who knows all of that to allow, not necessarily cause, but allow some suffering, even great suffering, to exist because it could result in a greater possible good in the future in a world of free creatures that actually have free will? It's at least possible, and if it's possible, then it's not contradictory. I put this to my friend, and after wrestling it with some time, he agreed it's at least possible. But I want to take it away from just the abstraction of theism and now bring it down to the reality of Christian theism. You see, that's just a theory. That's just philosophy. God works in mysterious ways. It's a sophisticated way of saying that. It's not invalid, it's just a sophisticated way of saying that. And I asked him, does that comfort you? And he said, no. I said, me neither. It doesn't comfort me at all, because it's a theory. But the Christian faith posits not a God who could allow suffering for a greater possible good, but the God who did allow suffering for his own son, and the father who sacrifices the son, the son who willingly sacrifices himself, not for a greater possible good of some kind of theory, but for the greatest possible good there could ever be, the salvation of the world. So I offered to him that, logically speaking, God could exist in a world where suffering exists because he could allow suffering for a greater good you and I are absolutely incapable of seeing. And I can trust in what he will do with suffering because of what he has done with suffering. And I think that is based on the fact of the crucifixion, and I believe the historical reality of the resurrection.
Do you want to give a rebuttal to
I just have a
Abdu's
question.
answers?
How do you know that God is a man?
Well, a couple of things. Jesus rose from the dead, and he refers to him as his father. If he rose from the dead, I should believe him, because guys who rise from the dead have credibility.
So women can't possibly be godlike.
No, they can be godly. I can't be godlike either. There's not one man in this room who can be godlike. Not one man. Not one woman. Not one human. Except for that one guy. Because he was the incarnate God. And so what is interesting, Margaret, when you ask that question, is that when you look at the way in which the Bible actually describes God, so he chooses the name Father. He's Father, we call him Father, Jesus calls him Father, he's the Son, the Holy Spirit, etc., etc. But then you see these moments in the Bible where even Jesus himself says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I long to gather you under my wings as a mother hen gathers her chicks to protect it." Men and women each bear God's image. The Bible is very explicit. In his image did he create them. Male and female did he create them in his image. So you bear God's image equally as I do, and there's nothing different about the two of us in that bearing of God's image.
Well, I'll disagree that I bear image to nature.
Okay.
I am a natural production of nature. I am an animal, just like you find in nature. And when we ask for answers to these difficult life questions, I would hope more people would look to natural explanations rather than supernatural.
Thank you. We're going to go to our first question. And so if you wouldn't mind, give us your first name and then ask your question. And I think we will have you answer first on this one.
Yes, well, my name is Jadiel. Thank you so much for this event. I was really interested, Abdu, in your story, you spoke a little bit about this moment of hypocrisy or dishonesty when you were examining Christianity. So I'm really interested. It seems to me like our confidence in our beliefs don't remain stable all the time, like depending on what season of life or experiences, if you're going on a walk, if you're seeing the birth of your first child, right? Or if you're seeing terrible suffering, a loved one dying of cancer or something, it seems like our confidence tends to change. I tend to believe in God a lot when I eat Chick-fil-A. Sometimes it's absolutely delicious. There are meals where I'm like, there has to be a God if for no other reason to explain this. So I'm just interested. I'm interested in this question of confidence in our beliefs, and I'm wondering, what does intellectual honesty look like in both communities? So in the theistic community, but also I'm really interested in the non-theistic community. Are there moments, do you know, like, what is it like for an atheist to be hypocritical or dishonest? Or are there moments where an atheist feels tempted or teased by something transcendent or supernatural? Or is everyone just completely confident all the time? So I'm just interested, what does honesty look like, confidence in our beliefs from both communities? Thank you.
Yeah. Like I said, we'll go first.
Great question, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jadiel. I appreciate that. Yeah, so I can say from firsthand experience, I know what it's like to actually experience that point where I'm like, I think I believe stuff because I'm supposed to. And I think this is wrong, and I believe it's objectively true. And then having to take that 9 years. You know, it's funny, that 9 years it took for me was not because the answers were hard to find. I found sufficient answers to become a Christian within 2 years. It took me 7 more years to deal with the consequences of that decision. Because the truth isn't always, the truth is easy to find, I believe, but the truth isn't always easy to accept. I experienced that. Now, there are times yet their confidence does ebb and flow. Since becoming a Christian, I would say that my confidence in God's existence and in God's goodness hasn't really waned. But my lack of understanding and serious periods of serious questions, like, I don't get this. This doesn't seem like it's fair. Will you help me with this? I don't get this at all. Is something I've definitely experienced. I've definitely experienced it rather recently, in fact. But having that trust, I remember, I hope she doesn't mind me saying this, but in 2022, my wife had 5 tumors on her liver. And that makes you think. Now, I don't doubt God's goodness in that moment, but I'll tell you this, that after numerous tests confirming those tumors and those lesions on her liver, the MRI said they're gone after prayer. So there's something interesting there. So for me to see that there's moments of that low, but then there's moments of that high as well. Now, I will say, intellectually speaking, I think that humility has to play into this, because I would never say that if I sat across a platform or across a table from someone of a different worldview, that their arguments hold no weight for me. You have to give them their shrift. You have to give them the just recognition of the intellectual heft. Clearly, Margaret is extremely clever and extremely bright and extremely smart and extremely thoughtful. So I can never say I'm so confident in my beliefs that Margaret has nothing to offer me or say to me. Absolutely not. I would never say such a thing. But I think that there's moments when my feelings of faith wane, but it's my understanding of the basis of my beliefs based on the empirical evidence and the philosophical evidence of my beliefs that sustain me. So knowledge sustains when emotion lets down. But then emotion comes back up sometimes to meet knowledge. I hope that's an answer to your question, but it's a good question. Thank you.
So I would like to make it perfectly clear that atheists are honest enough to say that science is young. But we will not make up stories to explain things. We will proceed with science exploration and continue the questions so that we will have answers. of course, your emotional story about the liver and the remarkable healings. I'm certainly hoping that none of you think that going to a doctor is not worth going to a doctor, but that you could pray away these things. I hope you don't do that. I want you to be honest with yourself and say that science can help you. Medical technology can help you. So that's my honesty.
I second that, by the way. Don't take what I said to be, don't go to your doctor. Please don't do that.
Excellent. Kevin?
Hi, yes, my name's Kevin. My question is for Ms. Downey. So in the past 20 years or so, one of the most polarizing issues that's come about in American society and the church has been the issue of LGBTQ rights. The problem that I have is that I don't feel either side really addresses the scientific aspect of it. As of more recently, in 2019, there was a massive study that came out which analyzed 500,000 samples from gay people's DNA, and it showed that out of that, about 8% only had any evidence of genetic variants. Specifically, there were 5 variants which they said collectively have less than 1% effect on human behavior. So my question for you is, as an atheist, how do you contend with the conflict between your own personal views and the biblical narrative concerning the human condition and its progression? And do you still feel that that human condition will be proven to be false given this new research?
Well, I don't know about this MIT research that you're talking about, but I do know that these propensities exist. They must be understood and accepted, and people that you're trying to say, I don't know if, my Bible is right or the science is right. You're trying to prove that the science is wrong because you say it's less and less people with this variant. But would you stone to death a gay person like your Bible says to do? Surely you wouldn't. And that's why I reject what the Bible says about people who are homosexual, women, people who ask questions. I just reject the whole nonsense of the Bible.
Do you want to have any rebuttal to that or no? Great. We'll move on. Glenn?
Yes, my name is Glenn, and I have a question for Abdu. Hi, yes, I'm wondering, given that there are dozens of major religions and hundreds of minor religions, I'm wondering into how much detail did you study the various religious traditions that there are across the world? And part 2 of that is, since you decided on Christianity, how confident are you that you picked the right one?
Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate that question. A couple of things on that. One is, so I did study quite a few and quite a lot. This is going to sound like a shameless plug, but it's not available anymore. It's sold out. But I had a book called Grand Central Question that assessed the major worldviews and because I think worldview is a good umbrella for religion. So certain religions fit within certain kinds of worldviews. So there's monotheistic religion, there's pantheistic religion, there's these kind of things. And they fit within certain worldviews. And then there's a non-theistic worldview. Some are religious, like certain strands of Buddhism. Others are non-religious, like either secular humanism or various strands of atheism. As Margaret said, there's a lot of diversity. So I did study a lot of them, and I continue to study a lot of them. And I learn new things all the time. So I don't claim to be the end-all, be-all expert in any one of them. I think in order to assess a worldview or a religious system, you don't have to know every jot and tittle detail of it because you probably never know all of that. I think I've tried my best to study as much of this stuff as I possibly could, and I still learn it. But there are certain basic claims behind the major, dozens of major religions, as you said, that fall within these worldview umbrellas, and then there's these various iterations of them. And so if I study the basic claims, the major claims, I shouldn't say basic, the major claims of those, and find them to be either philosophically wanting or empirically wanting, I can actually say, okay, look, that is a central question that this worldview is trying to answer, and I find their answer to be deficient, or I find there to be, or even possibly even contradictory. And then, so as I center around these things and I begin to see, I think the Christian worldview actually is a coherent belief system, because, this is to answer part 2 of your question, because all of its ideas make sense of the other ideas. And there is a development over time in terms of the revelation of the gospel message to the world. And so there is a development, not a discontinuity, but there's so much of it that makes sense of the world. I think it speaks to the human condition with an accuracy that I don't think any other worldview does. And I think Jesus is interesting because he's not a salesman. He's not telling you what you want to hear. And what you want to hear is, you're great, you're good on your own, you can do enough, and it'd be great. What he says is that out of the heart come evil thoughts, adultery, theft, slander, false testimony, and murder. That's not exactly a great recruiting poster. Yet he's telling us what we want, what we need to hear. And we need that sense of redemption. And I think when we look inside and we look outside, we see this is the way the world actually is. And then I think it also provides an empirical analysis of its claim. Jesus doesn't just say, I have a lot of good things to say, you should believe what I say, let it speak to your heart, and maybe you'll find within you the glimmer of truth or something, or the warmth of truth. What he says when they ask him, what authority do you do these things by? Who do you think you are exactly? Which is, by the way, a great question. I love that they asked him that question. And he says, when you destroy this body, I will raise it up again in 3 days. That's either true or it's false. He either died and stayed dead, or he didn't. He gave a falsifiable claim. That's very different than the Buddha, who said, look to my dharma and the wisdom of my teaching. Or even Muhammad, who said that the Quran is the ultimate miracle. Look to the beauty of the Quran. Or other teachers who said, look to the legacy of my teaching. As good as those things can be, Jesus gave an empirically verifiable or falsifiable claim, and then I believe actually did it. So that's why I landed on this one. The coherence of its doctrines, I think the benefit of its doctrines, the ideas it espouses, ultimately the historical empiricism of the Christian faith as well. So you don't have to study every single worldview to say, I didn't adequately reject those worldviews, because that would be true of literally everybody. If someone is an atheist, for example, it's like, well, did you study every form of theism and see if there's a belief in God? Well, no. Well, then how can you be an atheist? Well, of course you can be. You don't have to study everything to do that. But ultimately, I rested in the Christian faith because I found it to be intellectually and empirically true. Thank you, Glenn.
Do you want to say anything to-
How many wars have been fought over one religion versus another? It's shameful that we have so many religions that fight over words and fight over doctrine and theology. And my view is that in the natural world, we must take care of each other. We are social animals for a reason. This is how we survived. So,
Yeah.
not that I want to end all religions, but I think that a healthy way to look at reality and life and nature is through the eyes of atheism.
Do I have the rebuttal time? Or, yeah, it'll be 30 seconds. It's interesting, if you look to nature for these answers, as Lord Tennyson said, nature is blood red in tooth and claw. I mean, we are here because the weak were dominated by the strong. And that's the ethic of the advancement of humanity if there is no God. And I think that has been the paradigmatic ethic of some of the biggest despots in the world. So yes, have there been religious wars? Yeah, of course there have been. Have there been wars based on ideologies that have nothing to do with religion? Yeah. Have there been some wars and some oppression that's been due to people who are intentionally non-religious, like intentionally trying to suppress religion? Yeah. I think the Bible would say, and I think Jesus would agree, and I think that empirically speaking, the problem is not your ideology. The problem is the human heart who uses ideology.
Go ahead. You can have
With
it.
confidence in yourself as a human being, humanism can really be an answer to the way we treat people, the way we live, the way the world works. And like you said, have it in your heart, have it in your brain, that we are all one human family. Do we really need religion to divide us, to separate us, I don't think so.
Scott.
Hi, my name's Scott. This question's for Ms. Downey, and it ties in with the last question, actually. So you bring up science a lot, and it actually made me look at one of your previous videos. And I'm a physicist, so I appreciated your appreciation of science. And one of the, as someone who really into science, you'd know, one of the best ways you could tell a model, a theory, or a belief, or a claim is onto something is if it can be tested or predict something no one should have known. So all the different belief systems, they have to answer the big questions in life, and one of them is how do we get here? Where did this come from? So before all the evidence came in, atheism, the Eastern religions, and science, basically up to Einstein's time, all said that the universe had no beginning. It's a steady state. The universe always was, or maybe it was cyclical. The Bible, on the other hand, said not only did all of nature have a beginning, time had a beginning. Space and time began together. They began out of what was not visible. They follow fixed laws. They have decay, and they used all three verb tenses with it had, is, and is going to continue to expand. So what we found when science discovered some of the greatest discoveries in science are, the scientists involved who were atheists and agnostics said, the essential elements in the biblical account and the astronomical data are the same. Mathematical physicist Frank Tipler even said, Christianity is not a mere religion, it's an experimentally testable science. So the question is, and every other belief system, including atheism and science, got this wrong. But like Robert Jastrow said, when they finally got to this high mountain of learning, they found theologians who've been up there for centuries. So my question would be, if you don't think there's a God behind the Bible, if you think it's just human-made, then there would obviously be, without all the stuff humans have done throughout history, many other examples that are multiple, clear, specific predictions made 3,000 years in advance of modern science. So what would those other examples be?
Well, the Bible also claims Eve for evil. Does that make sense?
Well, that's a rabbit trail. You didn't answer the question. The question is, if there's a source that made multiple clear specific predictions that even the atheist and agnostic scientists 3,000 years later say, oh my goodness, they got it all right. If you think this is just human made, there should be many other examples. Do you have any?
I do not, but I am not a physicist. I am not a scientist. I am an atheist who have come to a conclusion that supernatural claims are just that, supernatural claims. I don't exactly know what you mean by a proven science in the Bible. I have never seen that in the Bibles that I have read.
The astronomers who made the discoveries of where the universe came from, they all recognized it. And
well,
if you have a book,
why was Galileo imprisoned for contradictory evidence?
Galileo was a Bible believer. He was in prison because of egos between him and people in the Catholic Church, but both him and Copernicus, where he got it from, they both knew that the Bible was accurate, but also knew that it was bad interpretation because the whole culture at the time followed Aristotle. So back to the original question, though. If you can predict, that's how we knew Einstein's relativity was accurate. Everyone thought he was nuts until his predictions came true. The Bible's claims went against every other belief system in science. They sounded crazy until we found out they're all absolutely accurate.
I cannot say that they were absolutely accurate. The world was created in 7 days. I mean, there's just so many things that I find totally ancient viewpoints. But you might be on a different
It's not me, it's the astronomers who studied it.
Thank you, Scott, for your question. Thank you for your answer. You want anything else, or want to go to another question?
No, that question's fine. Yeah.
Great.
Hi, thank you for holding this this evening. My name is Joe, and I have a question. You both spoke to the idea of higher level ideals and the importance of that. And specifically, transcendence was actually mentioned several times. So the idea of transcendence itself, I would like maybe both of you could expand, talk about what that means to you both as an atheist as well as a person that believes in a higher deity, a supernatural deity. And the ability actually to believe in something bigger than yourself, how important that is within that process, and the authenticity that is required, the intellectual humility, the intellectual honesty that is important when we're talking about how we live those ideals.
You want to start, please?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for the question. Joe, right?
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. A couple of things. So, as I understand and there's probably several definitions of the word transcendent. I'm not going to give an according to Hoyle or according to Oxford English Dictionary's definition of it, but what I mean is something that actually that actually permeates throughout all of existence. It's something that holds true throughout all of existence, and as something that we can recognize, maybe imperfectly so. So I believe I'm going to use a couple of words like epistemology and ontology. So ontology is the understanding of what things actually are and their existence. Epistemology is knowledge. It's like the study of knowledge. How do we actually know what those things actually are? So our inability to know perfectly what something actually is doesn't keep us from knowing that the thing actually is. So for example, light. Light operates as a wave. It operates as a particle. It operates as both sometimes. It is this mysterious thing that we don't actually know 100% what it actually is. Ask any scientist what energy is. And they'll tell you, yeah, we don't know. But we can manipulate it, we can harness it, we can use it, we can store it, we can do all kinds of stuff with it. Our epistemology of this reality is limited, but our understanding of its ontology, its actual existence, we can perfectly know that. Let me translate that now to the transcendent. We live in a limited world. I have a limited capacity to know a bunch of stuff. Whenever someone asks me a why would God question, I get a little nervous because what I'm asked to do is with my finite mind crawl inside the mind of the infinite and say, I got the answer. It's a little bit arrogant on my side. However, I do think that there are certain things that philosophically you can know as transcendent truths. So for example, when I use Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz's argument from contingency, so Leibniz argued essentially for God's existence by saying that there are certain kinds of, there are only two really different kinds of things in the world. When I say in the world, in existence, there are contingent things, things that depend on something else for their existence, and then there are necessary things, things that don't require an explanation. So my iPad is a contingent thing. I'm a contingent thing. Everything you're looking at is contingent. The universe is contingent because the universe, as according to standard model, had a beginning. But even if it didn't have a beginning, it could actually be different. It could actually conceivably have less matter or more matter. So it's clearly a contingent thing. So everything is contingent. Now, everything depends on a cause before it. So if I'm explained by my parents, and they're explained by their parents, and they're explained by their parents, eventually you go back to sort of an infinite regress of things within the scale of time. The problem with that is you can't actually have infinite regresses because then you could never start counting. You can't go from infinity to now, but here we are. So clearly there's a way to stop counting, to start counting to get to now. So the series of contingent beings has to stop somewhere. It has to. And that is a necessary being. And that necessary being, based on the science, based I think on philosophy, looks like it made choices. Because abstract ideas like goodness don't do things. They're effete, they do nothing. And so if goodness were a thing, then goodness violates itself because it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything good. Rather, goodness and justice and compassion and creativity, these are all things that find their grounding in persons. And if I believe in transcendent goodness, and I believe that this is a thing that actually exists, but goodness is grounded in a person, then for transcendent goodness to actually exist, it has to be grounded in a transcendent person. And that sounds scarily like God. And so that is the necessary being. So the transcendence, I believe, is something that goes beyond the contingent.
May I just ask, so it sounds like God, but does that mean it has to be God?
Oh, this is the first step. Yeah, this is the first step.
I'm just,
yeah.
Okay.
So you asked about transcendence. And so, but I do think that when you take a look at, yes, it has to be at least a causal agent. The necessary being has to be a causal agent because all contingent things were caused by this causal agent. And those, like numbers, as abstract objects, they don't do things. The number 7 doesn't irritate you. You know, the number 7 doesn't invite you to coffee. You know, these kind of things. So the thing that is the necessary being, I think, has to be a causal agent, and maybe even not only causal, but actually intentional.
Joe, you asked that for both of them, so I'm going to
Yes.
let you as well answer that.
I
Margaret.
have no need to talk about transcendence. I do have a need to talk about the human aspect, as you so eloquently said, that yes, human beings, it's up to us to do the right thing, to make changes, to study, to discover, to get the knowledge. But God is not needed for that. I know that you would be a good person even if you didn't believe in God. I know all of you would want to not have discrimination in your life, to be intolerant, to be hateful. You do that without God. I'm positive.
Yeah, I would just, my only response, I appreciate that, and I agree with that. I think that, you know, it's funny because the Bible actually predicts that goodness would be actually written in the hearts of all people. So it does actually say that. It doesn't say you have to believe in God in order to do good things. The question on transcendence, I think, comes back to, does goodness even exist for us to try to aspire to? Are there objective moral values and duties that we aspire to as a human race, other than human fashion and human opinion? Because it changes all the time, and it changes badly, oftentimes. The record of human treatment of other human beings is pretty bad. Sometimes because of religion, and sometimes because of just avarice and greed and people who baptize their deeds in religion or non-religion. So that's, I think that the answer I would give on transcendence has to do with, if human beings can be good, that's great, and I totally agree with you. But the question is, does goodness even exist as a thing for us to aspire to, as a transcendent reality? And I think that transcendency only makes sense if it's rooted in a transcendent person.
Great. We are about 12 minutes out from the conclusion of our event, so what we're going to do is we're going into fast forward round, okay? So we're going to ask you to ask your questions, and we're going to try to make the answers as concise as possible. Please.
Hi, my name is Katrina, and this question is for Ms. Margaret. Obviously, with Christianity and atheism, we can go back and forth and wax philosophical all day long. We can talk about faith, we can talk about feelings. I'm like you. I'm more interested in cold, hard facts, evidence. My question to you is, as an atheist, the Bible is one of the most historically documented, accurate, backed up by archaeology, by science, by so many different studies, book of all time. How, as an atheist, do you approach and handle and respond to the fact that they have discovered where the Israelites crossed the Red Sea? They've found chariot wheels at the bottom of the Red Sea and horse bones. They've found where the Israelites wandered through the desert. They've discovered Mount Sinai and how it's blackened from the top down. They crack the rocks open, they're brown inside, they're black all over. It's been burned with fire, mountain burned with fire. They found the pillar in the desert where they set it up to set up the golden calf. It's covered with Israeli symbols of worshiping golden calves. They've found where the rock was split, and Moses created that miracle through God through Moses, excuse me, where the water gushed out. They found the pathway that the water in the Sinai Peninsula.
This is
all
great
of
stuff.
these
Can we get
things.
to the question? Yeah.
How do you respond to that? These are cold, hard facts that back up the Bible and the miracles that God did in the Bible. How do you respond to that?
So myths are grounded in these stories. They might be true stories about a flood not taking over the world, but in that particular region, the Red Sea may have parted to in a temporary drought. There are many, many things in the Bible that are based in some historical facts, but they attribute these things to supernatural causes, to supernatural beings, to supernatural explanations. And that's where an atheist would reject the Bible in its entirety. It's not something that can be scientifically bound to explain the world, to explain history in trueness, in complete trueness, because it's ancient stories, it's ancient times. They didn't have the scientific explanation, so they attached supernatural stories to these occurrences, and that's how we look at it.
We're going to go over here.
Hello, my name is Joe. I promise there's no collusion in this line, though. Double Joe, nothing weird. My question for you, Ms. Downey, and I appreciated you sharing about some of the challenges you faced regarding some of maybe the ideological diversity whenever you went to the courthouse, and it was obviously very different than what you believe. As we think about our country and us being founded on not only monotheistic religion, but also Judeo-Christian values and our rights coming from a creator, how do you tackle the concept of rights, where they come from? And if you were to maybe engage with a fellow atheist on that, who would have a different perspective on that, how would you navigate that?
Well, first of all, the Declaration of Independence does talk about nature's God, and God does not appear anywhere in the Constitution. In fact, the Constitution itself says that there are prohibitions about swearing an oath to God and accepting religion as a faith of all the country. But, you're asking me, how, are you asking that this is a Christian nation, or are you asking that we should be a Christian nation?
No, I'm asking if you don't believe in the idea of maybe rights coming from a creator, unalienable rights, where do you might believe those rights come from, or the value with each human being, as an example?
From reason, from analysis of what society needs to have to be successful, and that's why we have a constitution, that's why we have laws, this is why we have things written about our rights. And the judicial system, the legislator, all of these things are very important for that to survive.
What happens if two societies disagree on that?
You mean if all societies said, well, I'm going to do what God tells me to do?
No, just if there's, let's say, two atheistic societies that have a different perspective on rights and ethics and where that comes from. In the concept of atheism, how do you navigate that?
How do we know what's right and wrong?
Sure.
Oh my goodness. Observation, experience, study, all of these things contribute to our reasoning and our, yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, just a quick response it's interesting because although the Declaration of Independence is not a foundational document in the sense that it's the law of the land, it's just a Declaration of Independence. That's literally what it is. And it's interesting that Jefferson was one of the authors, the primary author, but not the sole author. He does talk about nature's God, and of course nature is subordinate to God in that. But what's interesting is he says we're endowed, let's get rid of the creator part for a moment. We're endowed with certain inalienable rights. And I think this word inalienable is an important part of this, because they are, you know what it means for a right to be inalienable? It means it can't be taken away. Now, if rights come from human beings who exercise their reason and their judgment at a particular time, then those rights aren't actually inalienable. Those rights are actually contingent upon the favor you have with the governing authority at the particular moment. Now, we might get better at this, we might get worse at this, and better and worse, by the way, is not really a moral character if there's no God, it's just convenience. It's like, well, this helps society better. Well, you define it this way at this particular moment, but you might change your mind. For a right to be fully inalienable, it can't be taken away. But the power to grant a right is the power to remove the right. And so for a right to be truly inalienable, it has to come from a source and derive its value in something that does not depend on human vicissitudes and contingencies. It has to have that inalienability. Now, can they be violated? Yeah, they're violated. But if our rights came from human beings applying their reason, then the problem is this. When it was legal in this country to own people as property, did those people actually have rights? They're inalienable, but they're not inalienable because people gave them, because people took them away. But they did have those rights. Their rights to freedom persisted. They were violated, but they were never removed, which is why they could be restored.
Thank you both.
Yep. Hello. My name's Dave, and I'm a chemist, and I'm a Christian. And I have 4 older sisters. The reason I mentioned the chemistry thing is because I probably dabble in a little bit of philosophy, so this is going to be a little bit of a philosophical question for Margaret. Nothing entirely new as far as the last two people's question. The reason I mentioned my sisters is I have a lot of imaginary conversations with them where I try to persuade them of the Christian worldview. I would say some of my sisters have become sort of difficult people recent. Anyway, so that's a work in progress. In any case, so.
Can you give us a question? I'm sorry to rush you, but we have about 3 minutes, so
Yeah, I know. It's been really interesting watching you say 20 minutes ago how things were going to go into the fast round. Okay, let's endeavor to do so, shall we? So these are, Margaret, if you don't mind, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. Use your own words. I think you said earlier this evening, there is evil in the world. Talk about wars being fought. And it's up to us to do the right thing. So, again, the reason I mentioned maybe I'm the youngest of 4 older sisters, part of me wants to overcome all that juvenile problem. And, sometimes I think I would like to form the amazing Church of Dave. And in my church, if it was an atheistic church, anything goes. I mean, I get it. There's laws in Chester County. I might get in trouble. But in other words, you use a word like evil. Why is wrong? Or why is war wrong? There's all kinds of atrocities. But the question is, if from a proper, I think that I could have a proper atheistic worldview and create the amazing atheistic world, Church of Dave, and then I wouldn't be able to use words like evil or do the right thing, or say that war is bad. Okay.
Is the question, why is she using words like evil and war?
Sounds good. Let's
Right
go.
and wrong?
Let's go with that.
Okay.
But I did use that. I said, nature does not know right from wrong, or good from bad, or evil. Those are our words that we've made up in society to explain things about behaviors. And in nature, those things are a part of our world. And when you ask, why did this happen to me? Just turn to nature. Nature's consequences, your own actions could be a consequence. The actions of anyone around us could be a consequence. This is what happens in a natural world. And that would probably fit in with Dave's church? I don't know. Oh, is that?
Thank you. We're going to let Josh, we're going to have to end it here. Josh, we're going to let you be the last question. I'm sorry for you folks. Maybe you can speak with our guests during the reception, but Josh, we're going to let you be the caboose here on the last question. The best one, no pressure.
Oh boy. All right, well, it'll be for both of you. So I was curious because I'm a Christian, my sister claims to be an atheist, and so we have a lot of discussion at our dinner tables and stuff. And one of the things I was curious about is, just as a Christian, how do you define the purpose and value of life? And then how, as an atheist, do you answer that same question, with or without God?
Josh, right?
Yeah.
Thank you, Josh, for the question. I think it's a great question to end on, actually, because this whole meeting had a purpose. Hopefully, we didn't come here to spout gibberish at each other, but try to come to meaningful answers. And so I think life does have purpose, and life is imbued with it. What I would say to that, Josh, is from a Christian perspective, people always want to know what the meaning of life question is. And every time you see it in the media, or you see it in a movie or something. For some reason, a guy's got to run across country like Forrest Gump or something to find it. Or he's got to climb some kind of high mountain and get a huge beard and get eyebrows that won't quit until he gets to the top and he sees the guru up there sitting in the lotus position in front of the ashram humming something, and he says, "Oh, great master, great teacher, what is the meaning of life?" And then when he opens up his mouth, it cuts to commercial, right? Because no one knows the meaning of life question, and it's this kind of mystery thing, and it's too big for us to understand. I remember watching a TV show called Everybody Loves Raymond, and yeah, I'm highbrow, guys, I'm highbrow. His daughter asked him a question about where babies come from. And of course he botches it because he doesn't want to have the talk with his daughter. He says something about storks or some ridiculous thing. And his wife yells at him and says, "Ray," which is the whole premise of the show. He just bumbles things and then fixes it. He says, "Ray, you got to fix this." She says, "Ray, you got to fix this. You got to tell her the real facts because she's not going to believe us anymore if you tell her all these false things." So he works up the courage to go up there. He goes to his daughter's bedroom. He sits down next to the bed, and there she is playing with her dolls. And he says, "Okay, honey, you asked Daddy where babies come from. You see, when a man and a woman get together, when they love each other and they're married, they get together." She goes, "Whoa, whoa, Dad, stop, stop. I already know that. I want to know, why does God put us here?" And Ray says something ridiculous like, "Well, God puts us here because heaven is crowded." It's ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous. The whole point of that is that people, the meaning of life, the purpose of life question is so mysterious and difficult and hard. I believe there are subjective answers to why your particular life, how your particular life has a purpose, but it fits within the grand purpose. And it's actually quite simple. It's actually quite simple. And not to denigrate the whole process and the inquiry, but I think the chief premise of this is, and I'll quote cross-denominationally, hopefully you'll be okay with this, but the chief end of man is to glorify God and delight in his presence forever. The chief end of human existence is relationship. You and I are incurably relational. And we're not hive creatures. We're not just animals like bees or baboons or whatever else that live in pods, that do it for safety's sake or for evolutionarily advantageous reasons where they mass in herds to keep from being eaten by the predators. No, you're relational. You want, have, covet, mourn the loss of relationship. What explains that? A blind, pitiless, indifferent universe that doesn't care that you're here? Or the triune God of the Bible, who is one in his nature and three in his person, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, each one having relationship from eternity in the community of the Trinity. And he is the cause, and you are the effect. And if you are the effect of the relational cause, it makes the best sense of why you and I crave and want not just advantageous herding, but actually want relationship. And it ultimately is a reflection of a relationship you and I and all of us can enjoy for eternity and have that purpose for which you and I were made ultimately consummated. So it's not a big mystery, but it is a difficult thing sometimes to grasp in that sense of really it sounds too easy, but it also sounds quite grand. And I think the best truths are the ones that are easy to say, but leave you in awe.
So I would like to say that we can make our own meaning and purpose by realizing that this is our one and only life. We must leave this world a better place with more scientific advancements, ending discrimination, spreading joy and love and opportunities for those who need them.
Margaret Downey, Abdu Murray, thank you so much. Let's give them a big round of applause for being our guest tonight. We'll let you folks get your seats. Thank you. Yes. Folks, you're invited to a reception down in our gymnasium. Once you go out into the foyer, if you take a right, we've got some snacks, some goodies, some opportunity to discuss and talk further. And our guest tonight will be there as well. Thank you again.